We get ready to get cracking this morning. I say welcome back to the beginning. And I'm going to give you a little bit more of a disclaimer before we get started today because, and that might sound like bad news. It's really not that bad news is imminent. I know that we're talking about some pretty extreme things that happened this morning. But in fact, I hope that we'll look at the events of this story in Genesis 6 through 9 through the new window that we've been talking about as we've been in this study of the beginning. And I hope it changes a little bit the way we approach this story and understanding of why it happened and what it means and what the lesson actually is for us. But in order to get from Genesis 6 to 9, all before the Taylor Bowl later today, we got to move really fast. So that's the disclaimer. We got to go quick today. And I want to say that even though we're going to go fast, it's not going to be to the exclusion of what is most important for us today. Think of this kind of like our journey of the creation account at the very beginning. The reality is that we have studied this story so much and we've driven it through those data-centric Western filters so much, and we've asked questions of this text that the text isn't trying to answer so much that if we take the time to have all those discussions that we're used to having again today, we're going to not have time, and we're also going to miss what I think we really need to see this morning. So once again, the disclaimer is we're moving fast, and if I don't touch a particular topic today, it doesn't mean that it's not true or it's not important or that even we won't come back and settle in with it at some point in the future. I'm looking at you, Genesis 6, 1 through 4. If there are any nerds out there that are like, well, we're just going to skip over that, just for today, I promise. We'll come back to it. But we aren't going to talk about what type of wood gopher wood actually was. We aren't going to talk about a debate over how big the flood was. Was it universal or regional? We're not going to get into arguments with macroevolutionists about whether the fossils on top of mountain peaks prove that there was a flood that covered the entire world. We're not going to talk about whether the one of 7 times we've claimed to find the ark resting on a mountain somewhere in Turkey is actually accurate. We're not going to talk about how young a brontosaurus has to be before you can put it on a boat for it to be practical or viable. We're not going to talk about 8 people repopulating the earth, all of whom were close family. We're not going to talk about the sorts of things that we usually talk about when we talk about this story. But we are going to ask a question that we've been asking in this study, but it's going to be the most dramatic fashion that we've had to endure it yet. And I just want to be up front with you guys this morning. We are so familiar with this story. It's a classic. It's the classic Bible school story. There are nurseries across the country that are decorated with this story and boats and animals. And we love animals. If we love anything, we love animals because they're cute. And we love to sing about Noah putting all the cute little baby animals, 2 by 2 or 7 by 7, on his arky. I'm not about to sing. We did that a couple weeks ago. We don't need to sing today. We love to emphasize that God saved Noah because Noah was good. And I'm afraid that we boil this story down to a place where we tell ourselves that if we're good like Noah was good, then God will save us too. When we pour all our focus into cute animals and Noah being good, and I'm afraid that as we put all of our focus there, we completely block out everything else that's going on in this text. And there's a lot that's going on. And it's the everything else that is going on in the text that gives us all the problems and all the questions and all the discomfort. And if we get past the Sunday school telling of Noah and the ark, we get past the way that we sing about this and make dioramas about it and VBS this, and if we get honest about what's going on here, it gets uncomfortable. Because this story that happens in these chapters is the single greatest act of mass extinction and genocide that this planet has ever seen. And it's the God that we serve that decided to do it. See, up until now, we've been meeting our questions head on, and we've learned that God isn't afraid of them. And actually, God wants us to ask them because there's a point underneath that question that he wants us to learn about him and about ourselves. And those points are in the problems. But we're really raising the stakes today. This is the event that causes many Christians and non-Christians alike to doubt and question the character and integrity of the God that we serve. If we've been asking questions up to this point, what kind of a God would do this? That's the question that looms large over this account today. And then a question that goes beyond that. What kind of a God does this? And is that kind of God a God that is worthy of worship at all? Anyone who stops to think about this honestly has this question. What happens when God decides to wipe out an entire civilization that is older than our own? Man, woman, child, animals, cities, cultures, hopes, dreams, aspirations, everything. What kind of a God does this? This is genocidal. This is pernicious. This is everything that the atheist will tell you make the God you worship unfit to worship. And there's no amount of VBS that'll get us around that question. Now, so far, we've gone to great lengths to demonstrate that the God of creation is a loving God, contrary to the understanding of the God that's often painted to us. A God who thinks his creation is very good, and a God who hasn't given up on you. A God who invites you to enjoy his very good creation right along with him. But how is this love? How is this worthy of worship? How can you approach this kind of God at all? Is it really the case that man is bad, God gets mad, and we just wipe the slate clean, and that's really the story we're rolling with? God just kills everything. Are we really that bad? Is God really that mad? Am I, by extension, that bad? Those are the questions that come up when we sit in this story, honestly. I'm going to read beginning at the end of where we picked up here in chapter 7. It says, "Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, all your household. For I've seen that you are righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all the clean animals, male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, a male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I'll send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground." And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons and wives with them went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of the sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God has commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. And the waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. And the ark floated on the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. Remember Wayne's math? And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, and swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out everything. Every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, they were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Now, there was something I want to draw your attention to in this account as we begin. And that is that there is a pronounced progression of evil from the fall in Eden that we studied a couple weeks ago until now. It began as one choice between man and woman that originated inside of them and their own desires. And then it was next personified as a free agent of its own, the beast crouching at the door in front of Cain, longing to consume him. And then we saw it take root inside of the family system, but by now, by the time that we get to the flood, evil has organized itself. There's an exponentially increasing sophistication to the system of evil that has gone from corrupting just one family, one choice, to all flesh and even the earth itself. So as we ponder what is really happening here, it's good food for a thought for us to chew on, to ask this question: could things have really been that bad? Bad enough that the only option, as it says, God reasoned, was the hard reboot, the factory reset on the earth. In order to get to the answers, we need to ask these questions. We have to call back to a reality that I've tried to help us recenter on a few times in our studies so far, and that's that this story is being written to a specific group of people, the Israelites, who have a specific life experience that is complete with their own stories, their own history, their own perspective, and their own lived experience. Remember, there was not a little scribe in the corner room of the ark recording this, just like there wasn't a cherub angel with a keyboard in the Garden of Eden writing that account either. It's important because flood stories, as many of you know, are not unique to the Bible. They're actually flood stories from all over the world, especially this region of the world. The Sumerians had them, the Babylonians had them, Mesopotamians had flood epics. Almost every civilization that we have any record of at all understand the world and its origin and how it came to be today to include some sort of cataclysmic flood like this. And in many of those cases, their writings predate the time when Genesis was actually put down on papyrus or stone or paper, however far back you want to go. So, this leads us to a very important point. We call this a historical cultural memory. And it's simply the idea that if every culture, even one separated from each other geographically, culturally, linguistically, talk about an event or a story together, it's a pretty good indication that something like that event or story probably actually happened. So when anthropologists see these flood stories, they reason, well, some type of flood probably did happen because we have all these cultures talking about it. Now, we Western Christians have seized on this and we leverage it as an apologetic. We use it as a defense to the veracity and the authority of the Bible. We say, because we have this shared cultural memory, it means that Genesis is true, and that means that the Bible is true, and it proves that the Bible is right about the flood. And that is true. But I want to suggest to you that stopping there at that data level keeps us from so much more that God needs us to know about this story. And here's what it also means, church. It means that the kind of shock and discomfort that we feel when we read about this flood, this extinction level event, and God causing it, wasn't actually present for the original readers of this account. Why? Because this is like the dominant nursery rhyme of their time. As a matter of fact, it was a matter of fact, just like when we sing about the days of creation happening, just like when you grew up listening to Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? I got a spoiler for you, church. You don't really want to know. This was the nursery rhyme of their time. We come to this text and we say, whoa, 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 God's just going to destroy everything? But that's not the response that they would have had because they grew up with these stories. Of course he is. That's exactly what the gods of all the ancient cultures did. That's precisely the story that they're used to hearing. Every culture had a story where the gods tried to destroy the earth through a great flood. And the deluge, which is what we say when we want to feel refined and bougie in church, it comes as no shock that they're overwhelmingly familiar with this just being something that gods did. They tried to destroy the world. And so as God delivers this story, he is intentionally drawing upon the stories they already know to execute what's called a polemic. It's a theological correction in their understanding of how this actually happened and why. He's rewriting this cultural memory. It might even blow your mind to know that there are versions of this story that predate the Genesis account in which the names are the same. There's a Noah, there's a Shem, there's a Ham, there's a Japheth. True story. But there's a really famous one that we hear about a lot that's an extra biblical account of this event. Anybody ever heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh? Not just because Gilgamesh is kind of a funny name. This is probably one of the oldest pieces of literature that we have in general. And it's important because it's ancient Mesopotamian literature. And Mesopotamia is important because it's important to the region of the story where God's people are from. And some of you nerds are probably already tracking with me. I want you guys to know the term nerd has been reclaimed. I identify as a nerd. It's a good thing. It's not like a Revenge of the Nerds 80s thing anymore. There's a whole new term for that. If I say nerd, it's a term of endearment. And even if it wasn't, I'm right there with you. So we can laugh at each other. So, some of you are already tracking with me because if you ask where Mesopotamia is and why God would be choosing this story to correct the cultural memory and deliver an important message through it, you would realize that Mesopotamia, commonly today known as Iraq, is a place that used to be known as Babylon. But even before it was known as Babylon, it was known as a place called Chaldea. And that is a place that should be very familiar to the student of the Bible, because even back in the days when the prophet Habakkuk was arguing with God about how he was going to judge Israel, he told him, I'm going to raise the Chaldeans to come and judge you. And Habakkuk's like, that's not a good plan. But God is like, you wouldn't believe me if I told you how this is going to work out. And it ended in the gospel. But the point is to know that we haven't even met one of the most important figures in all of Scripture, and he happens to be living in a place called Ur. We'll get to him in a few weeks, and Ur happens to be of a particular people group known as the Chaldeans. So it actually makes all of the sense in the world that this story that's being delivered to the descendants of Abraham would be following this cultural memory that they already knew. Because this pivotal moment in human history teaches them and teaches us something incredibly valuable about the God of the flood. We are supposed to be asking the questions we're afraid to ask when it comes to this event. That question, what kind of God does this? Who is this God? Is exactly the question that the descendants of Abraham, who God called to himself, needed to ask when they got this story. That's the question. And here's the Cliff Notes version of the story they already knew, by the way. This is how it happens in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'm going to butcher this. It's going to have to be oversimplified because we don't have time for an entire epic. Some of y'all got to go visit the Wing King and get ready for big things later today. So this is the Cliff Notes version. Gilgamesh is the hero of the story. And in the epic, he essentially goes around meeting all of the Mesopotamian gods. And he learns their plans as he's meeting with them, and there's several of them. And at some point in the story, he always agitates them, or the gods become agitated with humanity at some point. And as he learns their plan, they determine that they are going to lash out at sometimes Gilgamesh himself, but a lot of times humanity at large. And the plan eventually becomes that the gods are going to destroy the world with a great flood because they're mad at humanity. This is the story that they know, okay? Now, at some point in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's another character introduced. His name is Utap. And this is the part where Maggie is either going to be amused or regret marrying me because our cat's name is Smoosh, but I call Smoosh Poosh. And then when I read Utap about 3 or 4 months ago studying for this, I just started calling our cat this name. So I've been running around the house calling the cat Utap for like 4 months, and she has no idea why until this very moment. And two things. One, it's really interesting living with me probably. And two, if you don't call your pet by names that aren't actually the pet's names, do you really love them? So Utap, this cat Utap rises up as the hero in the story, and he discovers the God's plan to destroy the earth. And he outsmarts the gods by, can you guess? Building a barge. And he takes with him on the barge animals of every kind and his family. And that is the context for the descendants of Abraham understanding how the world got to be the way that it is, what the gods are like, and how humanity somehow survived. The gods were mad, people were bad, but we had this hero who built a barge and outsmarted them. Is that the God that we know, family? The question remains, though, why is God destroying the earth by a flood? Is God really just like the God of Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim? Is God like the gods of the Epic of Gilgamesh? What kind of a God actually does this? If you remember back in chapter 6, verse 5, it says this: every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Those are a lot of absolutes. Words like every and only and all. That leaves little room for wiggling there. And every time I read that, I have a question that comes up like, really? Every single thought? Like there was no love between husband and wife and mother and father and child. Like every single thought was about how we could use someone else for our own devices or get one up on each other or commit violence or better ourselves by every single thought. What kind of a world would that be? Something really interesting happens, though, because you find almost the identical phrase repeated again in chapter 8, verse 21, where God says in his heart, I'm not going to destroy or curse the ground again because of man, for every intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. That's another way of saying all the time. And those of you who have been with us for our study in the beginning, I want you to hold that thought close, because if we have these two phrases that are identical, bookending a story, that's taught us to be looking for some type of particular Hebrew literary device that they like to use to show us the greater point in the story. And if some of your chiasm bells are ringing, I'm going to say you're right on the money, because we're dealing with yet another chiasm here. As a matter of fact, we are going to raise the stakes because there are two chiasms operating in this story. It's like an inception of a Hebrew literary device, a chiasm within a chiasm for this story. Gen Z would say God was in his bag when he put this on paper. Some of y'all didn't get that. It's okay. More on that next week. Let's dig a little bit here. First off, this is one of the easier chiasms to recognize out of Scripture because it is done with numbers, and that makes it really easy to pick out. We know conceptually that the Hebrews like to use numbers to make points and do a lot of things symbolically, but I just want to say a shout out to Mama Stenson. Mama Stenson is a mathematician, and I grew up in her house, and I hated math, so I stressed her out a lot. So today, Mama, we're going to dig through this text using numbers and math, and I just want to say to you, I love you. We made it. I hope you enjoy this. It goes like this. See if you can follow with me where we're going. 7, 7, 40, 150, 40, 7, 7. Do you see it converging in on the 150 and spanning back out? Those are there with intention. They are there on purpose. See if you can follow it. It starts in Genesis chapter 7, goes all the way through Genesis chapter 8 and verse 12. Look at this. It says, God told Noah to take 7 pairs of all clean animals and birds. That's chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. God says he will send rain in 7 days. That's chapter 7, verse 4. God says it will rain for 40 days and water will cover the earth. Also chapter 7, verse 4. The winds and the waves prevail on the earth for 150 days in chapter 7, verse 24. And after 40 days, Noah opens the window. That's chapter 8, verse 6. After waiting another 7 days, he opens it again, chapter 8, verse 10. And after waiting another 7 days, the dove comes back with an olive leaf and he sends it again. That's chapter 8 and verse 12. 7, 7, 40, 150, 40, 7, 7. Whew. That chiasm marks the center of the entire passage as chapter 8, verse 1, which reads, God remembered Noah and the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now that seems a little strange to me because it's not like God forgot that Noah was out there, right? God is not a God with ADHD. He cannot be outsmarted like the gods of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So God remembering that Noah was out there is a clue that we're supposed to dig a little deeper. And as you look at chapter 8 and verse 1, we see that God causes a wind to blow over the earth. And the Hebrew word there is Ruah, which is the same word that is used of God hovering over the waters of the deep in Genesis chapter 1. Rock with me, church. It says we have the Ruach of God hovering over the waters and the Ruach of God blowing over the earth. And it seems that we're supposed to be making a link to the connection between creation and the end of the flood. Track with me. The very next thing that Noah does is he opens a window. And what would have happened for the first time in 150 days? Light would have come in. So not only do we have the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, we then have the appearance of light for the first time again. We're also told here that the rain stops and the fountains of the deep close. And that means that you would have water over the surface, but since the fountains are now below and the heavens are now above, you literally have water suspended or being divided from each other at the end of the flood once again. The next thing that happens in Scripture is that dry land appears because we see the ark come to rest on top of a mountain named Mount Ararat. And then Noah sends out a raven so that we can have birds in the sky, just like day 5 of the creation account at the very beginning. Then Noah sends out a dove and it comes back with leaves, so we know that vegetation has appeared on dry land once again. Then he sends out the dove again and it doesn't come back, so now we have an animal on land. And then after that, the account says the animals come out and Noah and his family with him, so we have animals, and man on the earth all over again, complete with a command from God in chapter 9 to be fruitful and multiply. And if you don't believe me, God was definitely cooking when he put this one down. Because we have just gone through not just the extinction of everything, but the recreation of everything all over again in the exact same sequence. Wow. Do you guys realize what you are holding in your hand right here? Do you guys get how deep this is? Do you guys know that this is not something that someone just cooked up and decided to put down on paper to explain things the way that they are? This is not child's play. There's one thing that's missing from the recreation story that we would expect for there to be. Because if you remember, when we did the days of creation way back in week 1 of this, we emphasized the Sabbath day, that last day, that day 7. And it's not immediately visible here, but it is here. And I want to suggest to you that it is the entire point of the whole story that we are working up to. It is the point of what God is trying to teach us about him and about ourselves in this story. The key to it is found in chapter 9 at the end, verses 8 through 17. I'm going to read it for you, and then we're going to unpack it today. It says, "Then God said to Noah and his sons with him," this is after they come out of the ark, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you for your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the livestock and every beast of the earth with you. As many as came out of the ark, it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you and all future generations. I've set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and my bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When my bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Okay, if you haven't picked up on it quite yet, God has a thing for this word covenant, and there's an abundance of the word covenant in what he's telling Noah. There's a lot of repetition, and it's the kind of repetition that actually makes it awkward to read, because at no point during this conversation did I ever think that Noah could have forgotten that what is happening here is God is making a covenant, yet we still have that word 7 different times. That means it's a point of emphasis, and there's something particular that God wants us to know about this covenant that we're supposed to hone in on. Now, there's an Orthodox Jewish rabbi who I found particularly helpful in studying out these Genesis accounts. His name is David Foreman, and if you go look up some of his stuff, prepare to be blessed. Turns out he knows a lot about the Torah, but the teaching that was passed to him down through the ages and he now shares actually blows my mind even more than what's already blown my mind today. In that passage, he points out that there are a lot of repetitions, like of the word covenant, but also for other words. The word covenant is used 7 times in this brief section. Earth is used 7 times. Clouds is used 5 times. And bow 3 times. And if you notice how all these numbers are odd numbers, and some of us immediately are happy because we love odd numbers. Anyone else out here can only put the volume on increments of 5? There have been real fights. Households have been split because someone stopped at 12 and it was not okay. Someone got restless leg syndrome and they just had to get it back to 10 or to 15 immediately. And we love odd numbers because odd numbers divide perfectly right down the middle. There's something that can be split apart. And when I say down the middle or point to the center, you wouldn't be thinking of a chiasm, would you? 2 for 1 in the same 17 minutes? We're doing really good on time, guys. You good? You good? Another chiasm? How wild would it be for God to put a mini chiasm inside of his larger chiasm? What the teaching is when you take the center mentions of all those words, like the 4th covenant and the 4th earth and the 3rd clouds and the 2nd rainbow, it points to the end of verse 14 and the beginning of verse 15 of chapter 9, which reads like this: when my bow is in the clouds, I will remember my covenant. the center of this whole teaching is about God remembering his covenant when he sees his bow in the clouds. Just a note, the Hebrew doesn't have a word for rainbow. So some of your translations, like the ESV, if you're using that, just say bow. So the original intent of this passage is far from the pretty stained glass symbol in the sky that you learned to call Roy G. Biv when you were in second grade. I don't even remember what all the technical words for those. Indigo's in there somewhere, red, orange, yellow, blue, all of those. This is not what God is trying to say. Look at this pretty thing in the sky. He's setting up this covenant, and he emphasizes again and again and again a covenant, an agreement between two parties for which there has to be a token. In the ancient world, it was set up between a suzerain and a vassal. More on that in a couple of weeks, but the suzerain agreed to protect the vassal if the vassal pledges allegiance. But in order for the suzerain to protect the vassal has to produce a token of that covenant. So if a rival party came in and tried to raid them or attack them, they produced the token of that covenant, and they would know, we cannot mess with them because they're under the protection of the suzerain. But if you don't have the token, then it doesn't mean anything, and you're not under the protection. It's similar to a wedding ring. It's the closest thing we probably have in our culture. So what is the function of a bow that is the sign of a covenant that is sitting in the clouds? So if we take it out of Roy G. Biv and the pretty sign that it is, what is a bow? Any hunters? Anyone get excited for bow season here? What is a bow? It's a weapon. It's a weapon that destroys and kills. And so this whole teaching is summed up by God saying, I'm going to give you a sign of the covenant that I'm making with you that you don't have to hold and keep and present, but one that you will never lose. I'm going to put it in the sky. You don't even have to worry about it. The guarantee of this is my bow, my weapon of destruction in the sky. And you might say that's a weird thing to give to someone as a covenant right after you finished destroying them. But if you ever notice the way that a rainbow points and you know how a bow fires, when God put his bow in the sky, arcing upwards, does it make more sense why this is the perfect token of the covenant that he's making? Because God's bow in the clouds, his weapon of destruction, is not pointed down at us like the destruction that just came on us. His bow in the clouds is pointed up towards him. So if that thing goes off, who takes the arrow? So when God says, I'm putting my bow in the clouds because I will never again destroy the earth like this. And the sign of my covenant is my bow, my weapon, but not pointed downward at you, but pointed upward at me. God is saying the next time I need to bring judgment on the earth, the next time I need to bring my bow, I will bring it to bear upon myself. And this is my covenant. So family, the next time that you look up and see a rainbow, I hope you actually see Jesus, because years later, he did bring it to bear on himself. He did take the judgment himself. He did point it at himself, and he did deal with it. You know, it seems like we did all that work and we never found the Sabbath, the rest at the end of recreation, but we did. Because if you remember and see creation as a story about a God who knew when to stop creating. You remember the analogy of the painter, one more stroke ruins the painting and one more chisel swipe with the hammer ruins the sculpture. A God that knew when to stop creating, and that this story is the story of a God who knows when to stop destroying. Day 7 is present here because we meet the God who knows when to say enough once again from destruction, from recreation. The gods that the children of Israel were familiar with, the gods that are crude caricatures of the God that you serve, are gods who are vengeful, and the salvation of the earth only happens because this guy named after my cat outsmarted them. But this God, when he looked at mankind destroying each other, Genesis says in chapter 6, he was grieved in his heart. So if your skin crawls and you get intensely uncomfortable by the idea of a God who acts in divine judgment, to see God just washing people away like that at a massive scale, you need to know you have permission to feel that way, because it also makes God's skin crawl. If it hurts your heart to think about this actually happening, the part you can't afford to miss is that it hurts God's heart even more. And I hope you don't continue to read this story and think you have to rationalize away what happened and ignore the cognitive dissonance and paint it into a happy story. This is one of the problems that we are supposed to sit with. It's one of the problems that teaches us a lot about ourselves and a lot about God. You know, the word in Hebrew that God uses when it talks about his heart being grieved is a word that actually means unfulfilled longing. It means absolute anguish. Later in the scriptures in the book of Isaiah, it's associated with being deserted by a spouse. Any of you who have experienced that, or any psychologist, will tell you how excruciating that is. The unimaginable anguish. And this is how God chooses to describe the pain he feels when we turn from him and descend into violence against each other. It hurts God to see us destroying ourselves. It grieves God. This correction of their understanding of the flood, and hopefully our understanding of the flood too, is that God did not do this out of anger. He did not do it to punish us. He didn't do it out of spite. He's not like an earthly dad about to lay the lumber to you after you got in trouble saying, yeah, buddy, this is going to hurt you way more than it's going to hurt me. That's not the God of Genesis. That might have been the God of Gilgamesh. That's not your God. Because God doesn't need us. But if it's grieving his heart to see us hurt, it means that his heart has been willingly given to us and bound up to us in an extent that when he sees our lives going wrong, it hurts him just like, if not more. In the garden, God came to us and put his joy and his heart in our well-being and our thriving. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we looked at God and we said, we don't want you. We don't trust you. That language for a deserting spouse is really appropriate when you realize what's actually happened between God and humanity. One scholar has written that the tears of God are the meaning of history. And I didn't get that at first, but it makes a lot of sense. Because everything that comes after that point where we turn from God in the garden is really God dealing with our decision to turn away from him willfully. Why didn't history end right there? Why is there even history if not God deciding through anguish and pain not to give up on us? And Jesus being proof that he never will. This act of divine judgment, family, is not God vengefully, maliciously, immaturely acting as a tyrant. It is God doing what love does. The opposite of love is not anger. It's apathy. You could never care for something less than when it doesn't bother you anymore. So God, doing what love does, loving us enough to do what needs to be done, and loving us enough presently to point his bow at himself to see us saved from our own mess and our own violence. He gave us this covenant by putting his bow in the clouds, and by the blood of Jesus, he has kept it. He is faithful. At the beginning of the story, the Bible tells us that God took action because every intent of the human heart was evil. And at the end of the story, in that phrase again, God is saying, even though every intent of the human heart is evil from their childhood, I will put my bow in the clouds and I will deal with it myself. This is not the story of people bad, God mad, the end. This is a story that proclaims that this God is not the God you've heard about. This God is not the God of Gilgamesh. He is not a God of blind destruction. He is a God of deliverance. And once again, he asks his people, will you trust me? I hope that we will learn this lesson every single time. we see his bow in the clouds. If you are here today and you have not put your trust in Jesus Christ as the fulfillment of that covenant, if you have not seen what he has done for you, and you've not entered into the protection that is offered by that covenant, I want you to know this God is not like other gods. He loves you, his heart hurts for you, and he would like nothing more than to be reunited with you just the way he wanted from the beginning. And you have the opportunity to make that choice now. If we can serve you in any way, please come as we stand and sing.